Luckily for the Cincinnati Bengals, free agency is not the only way to improve your team in the offseason. And a biggest opportunity to add talent is the NFL draft. We haven't done a mock draft Monday in a while, but it's time. Let's dive in.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien, and we are Locked On Bengals, covering your team every day on the Locked On Podcast Network. We're on YouTube. We're everywhere you get your podcasts. Everydayers already know that. They've already hit the subscribe button. They've already rung the bell. And shout out to all you everydayers who make us part of your daily routine. Love to see more of you join that club. And I've told you how to do it. Subscribe, hit the bell, wherever you get your podcast, or if you're on YouTube, to hit the bell. And today, James, we dive into our first Mock Draft Monday where we're running the draft, I think, of this draft season. I don't think we've done it. We've talked through some other mock drafts. We had John Sheeran on for a mock draft he did on A to Z Sports a few, weeks? Is it a month ago at this point? But it's time.
It feels like years. Feels like 10 years.
Might
it's Mock Draft Monday, baby.
And the reason that we're choosing today is because free agency is in its doldrums. We're at the end. There are still moves that the Bengals could make, and they can make more cap space and all of those things. We just spent an entire episode yesterday being critical of their cap approach and their approach to free agency. We're not going to do that today. We're not going to talk about the cap today. But as of today, there are still holes on this team, James, and that's part of the exercise. If free agency is, in fact, done for the Bengals and we get to the draft, how do we feel the impact of that free agency as we try to navigate this draft?
Well, yeah, we're going to have to first Mock Draft Monday. We're going 3 rounds. It's going to have to be the biggest 3 rounds since certainly the 2020 draft. I mean, we're going to have to nail these things. I mean, Mock Draft Monday comes with a special pressure now when it comes to the Cincinnati Bengals and their Super Bowl hopes. And hopefully we're doing an emergency pod, to be quite frank with you, later today. That's not something either of us anticipate. But if that does happen, if there is news, we'll obviously cover it with free agency. But it is time to set our sights on the draft because it's 1 month away. It's the other element here. It's 1 month away, which it's going to fly by. It's going to be here before we know it. And the Bengals are going to be on the clock. And let's start to get to know these names, start to have the discussions the Bengals are certainly having right now. I think there's about 12 pro days today across the country as well. So some high-end NFL prospects are working out today. The Bengals certainly eyeing those guys, and so are we on a special first edition of Mock Draft Monday.
And I think what we're going to do here, James, is typically we don't take trades as often as you might when you're doing these. If you're in the mock draft machines at home and it's midnight, you're sitting up in bed, you got the mock draft machine on your phone, you've gone through 12 different mock drafts, you've tried to trade back, and you're like, man, look at all these players I can get when I trade back. We'll talk about the scenarios of trading around a little bit, but probably not going to take any trade offers in this one. We'll try to stick with the Bengals picks. And let's dive in, shall we? We're going to be using the PFF simulator today, and let's see who our options are as we kick things off here, and we'll see who we can pick at the 17th pick. And I forgot to change it from turbo. For those of you watching on YouTube, I'll slow that down for the rest of our picks here. But for those of you that are in our audio audience, if you're hoping that a skill player like Ashton Genty or Tyler Warren were going to fall, that didn't happen here. Jahad Campbell notably picked at 11 before our selection. Jahdae Barron at 8. The offensive linemen that I think you would most strongly consider, Armand Membo and Will Campbell, off the board as well. Jalen Walker, Kenneth Grant selected ahead of our pick at 17, James. Having seen all of that, what's your first thought when we consider the names available to us?
Yeah, that safety very well could be the best player available when the Bengals are on the clock. And that's a very real possibility. And looking at the big board here, Malachi Starks is 9th on PFF's big board in the simulator, he's just staring right at you. Now he's not alone. You got Mike Green as well, who I know PFF really likes. A lot of people like him as an edge rusher. You got Donovan Ezeraku as well from Boston College, another edge rusher. And I wonder about those two guys, Jake, just the size element of it. Obviously, off the field, who knows with Mike Green, but that's going to come up. And I think that that's going to be a discussion when it comes to a first round edge with a lot of these guys, is the James Pierces of the world. It's just going to be size. Walter Nolan available, though. I think he is very much in the mix at 17. And I also would imagine that Derek Harmon's still available, and he is out of Oregon. And I think he's very much a contender as well for the 17th pick. Other guys that could be in the mix, I know people like to dismiss it, but I think Colston Loveland certainly in the mix. Shamar Stewart is one that I think the Bengals very much could jump at right now. And literally, there's no size questions with him. It's all production questions. My man has got a half sack in 4 years. No, it's not that bad. But the production questions with Shamar Stewart are what's going to come up. Certainly not the athleticism or anything like that. Michael Williams, his teammate at Georgia, also available. What stands out to you, Jake, as we kind of look here? Is there anyone else, or those have I hit most of the names you'd be thinking about?
I think you've hit most of the names. Just to run through them: Malachi Stark, safety out of Georgia; Mike Green, James Pierce, Donovan Ezeraku from Boston College. 3 edge rushers there, all a little bit undersized. James Pierce from Tennessee, Mike Green from Marshall, the transfer to the smaller MAC school. I think Kelvin Banks is a name that didn't come up that I would mention here. Good pass protection as a tackle at Texas, but doesn't necessarily have the size to stick at tackle. And if you were looking for a potential guard pick in the first round, I think Kelvin Banks as a tackle to guard convert is a name that will come up between now and the draft. You mentioned Walter Nolan, you mentioned Derek Harmon, you mentioned Shamar Stewart and Michael Williams, Colston Loveland you mentioned as well. All players that I think would be in consideration for that pick, along with the one guy you didn't mention here, Gray Zabel. If the Bengals wanted to go back to the North Dakota State well and hope that you're not scouting the helmet here, Gray Zabel, a very different player from Cordell Volson, and can play along the interior, I think, at multiple spots. So if you're looking for an interior lineman pick there, I think Gray Zabel is the last name I would mention. The other thing I'd mention here is that's a whole lot of names that we're talking about. If there are like 10 players here, and maybe it's not quite 10, maybe it's 6, that you're okay with the Bengals drafting, this is where we would talk about the trade back scenario.
Sure.
I think that you would have to be strongly considering trying to add a pick to move back 6 to 7 spots if there are 6 or 7 players you're comfortable with here.
Yeah. And honestly, that's going to be the most popular thing over the next month. Breaking news. The most popular thing is going to be a trade down from 17. And who knows? Maybe it happens. I don't really think, I've looked at it today, I don't really think that there's going to be a team that has to get to 17 for a quarterback.
That's the challenge.
That's the most, like, you'd have to leapfrog. Like, you'd have to think Seattle was in on quarterback or Pittsburgh was in on quarterback. Outside of that, you could just wait and just move into the 20s or move up a few spots and not have to give up that kind of capital. So of these names, I do think there are tiers. Like, I named a lot of guys because it's a month out and because we're just starting to really dive in. At least I am. I mean, for me, Malachi Starks would be really high and on my board as of now. And looking at these other guys, I think the other one for me would be defensive tackle, and Walter Nolan and Derek Harmon. Those two are the other ones that really stand out. I think that those guys are pretty intriguing. Not that the edge rushers aren't. Shamar Stewart's going to be someone that a lot of teams are going to be considering in the top 10. And I think the Bengals probably take him here if he falls to 17, to be honest with you, which is going to make a lot of people cringe. And I think a lot of people smile. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I think that I'd be in on the defensive tackle, me personally, defensive tackles or safety, but I could see them going with Shamar Stewart.
Yeah. I think any of these bigger edge guys could be in play. Maybe even Nick Skirton, who we haven't mentioned, who's down here on the list. But the thought would be, is it Malachi Starks to be the game-changing safety, the force multiplier at safety, or is Walter Nolan that guy for you on the defensive front? And if we're talking about marrying up need with value, I think that is the closest one here, would be Walter Nolan. But if you're talking about strictly like just get the player that you think is going to make the biggest impact on your defense, maybe that is Malachi Starks. And I think that is the complicating bit here. But they're very, very close as prospects, Malachi Starks and Walter Nolan, in my mind, if we're eliminating the smaller edge rushers. And so maybe you just lean Walter Nolan there because he can be your defensive interior player of the future.
Will we take Nolan? Will I make a big case for Derek Harmon? We'll make our pick 17th overall coming up next. By FanDuel. And FanDuel is America's #1 sports book, and March Madness is here, and it's down to the Sweet 16. And maybe your bracket is busted. Well, that's where FanDuel comes in. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from Duke to Kentucky to any other team that you think is going to make a deep run, maybe to the Elite Eight, maybe to the Final Four. You can make up for those busted brackets right now with FanDuel. And that's the beauty of it. It's not just college hoops in March Madness. You can get in on the NBA action this week. You can get in on Reds baseball with opening day on Thursday, NFL futures, and so much more. Get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins with FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com and get in on all of the college hoops action. Again, that is FanDuel.com.
You going to talk me into a different defensive tackle here, James? What's your thought process?
Yeah, it's those three. And me personally, I'm not locked in on defensive tackle in round one. I think Derek Harmon's really intriguing as someone you could bring in. And yeah, you're highlighting it on YouTube, the pass rush win rate, the true pass set rush grade. I think, do you think, one, are you comfortable with everything with Walter Nolan? Is he going to be not just a 3-tech like a Larry Ogunjobi, but a 3-tech that's just going to wreck things? And if so, then you take him 17. And I'm fine with either one. I'm also fine with Malachi Starks. If it were me today, I probably take Starks. If you're leaning Nolan, though, I'm fine with that, especially because if we polled our listeners and viewers, this is our first Mock Draft Monday, I think they would say defensive line all the way. I really do. So I'm fine defaulting to Walter Nolan.
If anyone listening or watching is on pins and needles, screaming at their screen, you can't take a safety. Well, we'll capitulate this one time to those of you out there that are yelling at us, because I can hear it. I can hear you all yelling at your screen, typing the comments on YouTube for those of you that are watching on YouTube. So let's go Walter Nolan here.
They weren't even ready. They weren't even ready for my take Walter Nolan. They weren't even ready for my Colston Loveland argument that will be happening within the next month. Don't you worry. It will. But we're not there yet.
I think it's something that will have to be discussed at some point in greater depth than we have talked about it as a vague possibility. But we go Walter Nolan in the first round. Donovan Ezeraku goes immediately afterward. Josh Simmons, Kelvin Banks come off the board. Tyler Booker at 23. If you're interested in the first round guard from Alabama, Malachi Starks makes it a few more picks to 24 to the Minnesota Vikings. Gray Zabel, who we mentioned, at 25. Derek Harmon, who has been compared to Chris Jones, goes at 31 to the team that employs Chris Jones, because of course Colston Loveland makes it all the way into the second round, which given what's going on with his stock right now and the way people are talking about him, certainly some people have him as tight end 1 in the second round. It's a bit of a surprise. Nick Emmanwori makes it all the way to 36. One of my favorite players in the draft, Tyleik Williams, did run-stopping defensive tackle from Ohio State, goes 37. Another 3-tech kind of defensive tackle in TJ Sanders at 40. Nick Skirton at 41. Trey Amos, a clear cornerback target if he makes it to the Bengals pick in the second round, in my opinion, from Ole Miss at 43. Xavier Watts, who I was ready to draft without thinking, at 49, picked by the Cowboys at 44. And here we are, James, making our selection at pick 49 with some considerations.
Yeah, that's a tough one because I think the Xavier Watts one would have made this one pretty easy. And you look here, Demetrius Knight Jr. is the highest PFF graded player available. Maxwell Hairston, the corner out of Kentucky, available. Cam Scadaboo, very popular Arizona State halfback, available. JT Tuimaleu from Ohio State. I might have butchered it, but the edge rusher there. Quinshon Judkins, Carson. I forgot his last name from UCLA. Schlesinger. Yeah, So Jake is scrolling here, and I'm reading his screen, just like so. So for the audio audience, it's not like I have control over it either. So this is it's day one for us too. Jack Sawyer available, Elijah Arroyo available. So I mean, a lot of popular Bengals targets I think went off the board right before, but still some guys. Benjamin Morrison I think is in consideration as early as 49. Would not be shocked at all there. I honestly think though that round 2 running back like Travion Henderson, I think the Bengals may end up loving the Ohio State kid, Travion Henderson. And I would not be shocked at all if he would be in the mix at 49 here. Quinshad Judkins, I mentioned him in Scadaboo. So don't be shocked if any of those guys are in the mix. Also, I didn't mention, is the LSU edge gone? Yeah, Braden Swinson just went. I do think he could be in the mix here as well. Not surprised he didn't fall, but would have been nice if he fell to consider here.
Landon Jackson, the other one that I think would be very interesting to the Bengals at pick 49 if he were available there. Has the size, the run defense, the athleticism that you would hope to develop. Princely Yu, whose name I cannot pronounce, from Ole Miss, also available here, but a little bit smaller. Great pass rush win rate data, and has certainly some skill in that area, but I wonder there about the size. But you mentioned running back. I mean, every running back you could possibly imagine available here if the Bengals want to go that direction. But James, I am going to argue here to scroll down a little bit, and there's a couple players that I'm particularly interested in since we went defensive tackle in the first round. So Omar Norman Lott available here. Some people love him as a player who can do more with more opportunity in the NFL. But I'm looking at a Ohio State player, James, Donovan Jackson, who played a lot of guard for the Buckeyes, kicked out to tackle. And if you're looking for a guard in this range, maybe it's Tate Ratledge. Maybe we go get the Georgia kid who tested great, dealt with an injury last year. Donovan Jackson, another one that I think by average draft position would be a little bit higher. And then I wonder about the medicals on Benjamin Morrison, who, if they wanted to go to corner, Al Golden, obviously very familiar there, Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame, but the injury history with his hip, a little bit scary.
Sure. And that's what it's going to be for a lot of these guys is that health factor and what the medicals say behind the scenes, right? And it's not just him, the Michigan corner as well that has a pro day coming up.
Will Johnson?
Will Johnson. Yeah. Like he's going to be we didn't mention him at 17. He will be in consideration at 17 if he's there, if he checks the medicals. You just don't know. And so it's the same thing. For sure. And he might be picked. He might go 8th. But the medicals are big there. So we'll see on those two corners. I'm open. I'm open right now, to be honest with you. I saw a mock where Maxwell Hairston went to the Bengals here. I'm not in on Maxwell Hairston here. I know he tested really well.
Moves great.
I think had a really intriguing combine. I'm not sure if you take him at 49. I may feel differently in a week or two, of course. All of these opinions can change very quickly. But that would be the one I would rule out at this point.
Hairston moves great. I think that he should be probably in consideration in the second round. It depends on how you feel about Morrison's medicals, to be honest. I think I lean Trey Amos between all those guys. Amos is clean medically compared to those guys anyway. I think that is one that you would have to consider. Azaria Thomas, whose name I probably butchered, I don't know if he's available to us here, will be another corner if you wanted to go corner. I think you should strongly consider Demetrius Knight out of South Carolina as well as a plug-and-play linebacker, a little bit older as a prospect, but a very good linebacker prospect. There's a reason that he's 33rd on PFF's big board, and we're picking here at 49. But would you feel bad if we picked a guard here? I mean, should we be talking more about Elijah Arroyo as a receiving tight end option? Should I be thinking more seriously about the running backs, James?
Well, I think they will. I would be in a position where you didn't need a guard here.
Well, yeah.
But they aren't. And I think you do need one. What are you going to do? You're going to wait another round?
And hope for Tate Ratledge at that point.
That's where I'm at. I think if there was no need, Demetrius Knight makes a ton of sense. I think he probably is BPA. And oddly enough, was compared to his player comp for Lance Zierlein was Jermaine Pratt, which I think is hilarious. That's the count. Obviously, you would want him to be reach probably another level if you're taking him in the second round. So I would say guard or Demetrius Knight, and we will get to our second round pick, and we still have a whole nother round to go. We'll speed it up a little bit coming up next.
So here's where we're feeling the pressure, James. We're feeling the pressure of not feeling like we have a starting guard on the roster.
Yep.
And so we're not maybe considering some players that we otherwise would be considering. Maybe even Xavier Restrepo, who I haven't mentioned, who is very intriguing as a slot option if you wanted to improve your weapons on offense. I've picked Restrepo when I've done these pre-free agency a few times. Elijah Arroyo, player we could be considering here. And I think some of these edge players, some of these edge players I think are very interesting too. And I do think there's a fall off at corner after the second round, where if you wanted to get a corner, this is probably the time. I also think if we look at guard, is there an opportunity to get a guard or a tackle convert a little bit later? And then we're talking mostly about tackle converts. You're talking about Marcus Embo from Purdue and kicking him from tackle into guard, Wyatt Millam from West Virginia and kicking him in to guard from tackle. You're talking about hoping Tate Ratledge is available to you in the third round, who he might be, but you're hoping for guys to be available. So that's the risk reward here. Do we feel like we can take a player that isn't a guard with the pressure on us to find a guy that can step in and play right away?
Yeah, I'm always the players, not positions. And so I'm going to default to the best player available. By the way, if you think it's Maxwell Hairston, speak up, because I'm still open to that. I just, as of now, I'm not jumping for joy, but you look at some, and some have him, that would be a steal at that point. At the same time, Demetrius Knight Jr., that fills a major need that I think the Bengals plan to fill in the draft. I don't think they're going to go and get a free agent linebacker. I think they already did that. And so I would lean Demetrius Knight, which is going to dismantle all the dreams, hopes, and wishes of a Jack Kaiser in round 4, probably, which a lot of people have been doing in round 5. But no, I think he could come in and start for you right away.
I am going to hope that we can get a guard later. I'm going to argue for a different linebacker, though. I like Carson Schlesinger more, just straight up. Linebacker out of UCLA. And if we're cool with going linebacker, we can say James is taking Demetrius Knight here, and I'll go Carson Schlesinger. How's that work?
It's fine with me. Look, this whole action and everything about it is about getting to know all of these guys and getting our audience familiar with these guys. Lance Zierlein does not have a player comp for him. I was hoping it was going to be Logan Wilson. Just have
both the Bengals linebackers.
I was really hoping that it would be, they're similar grades. No, I'm fine with that. I look at just some of the next gen stats and stuff, and I haven't done a ton on the linebackers yet. Let's go with Schlesinger.
I think you could definitely make an argument here for the Ohio State edge rushers as well as potential plus run defenders that have some pass rush upside depending on the athletic testing. But we'll go linebacker here, and I'm assuming people will be very upset about that because the guard that we were talking about from Ohio State was picked 2 picks later. And now at the top of the board, our pick at 81, according to PFF, is Mason Taylor, son of Jason Taylor, LSU tight end, followed by Chris Paul, linebacker from Ole Miss, Marcus Embo, who I mentioned from Purdue as a potential guard convert from tackle, Terrence Ferguson, another tight end from Oregon, Jared Wilson, the athletic center from Georgia with 1 year of starting experience, Kevin Winston, who is a very exciting safety prospect coming off of a pretty serious injury, Jonas Savaiina, probably a name I'm butchering, another tackle guard convert prospect potentially from Arizona, Wyatt Millam, and Tate Ratledge is there for us in the third round, which is probably a very obvious pick because I think a lot of people are expecting the Bengals to have to pick Ratledge if they want him in the second round.
Yeah, I think spoiler, that's part of why I knew, and this is the downside of the simulators. Tate Ratledge is available in every third round PFF simulator, period. and who knows if we'll actually get there. But yeah, I mean, that would be probably my pick. I mean, you're looking at what the Bengals need. And if you could get Tate Ratledge in the third round and you get a really good linebacker in the second, and you've addressed the interior of your defensive line in the first, well, you could see it coming together. So that's where I would be. I don't know if anyone else stands out to you. I think running back is very much in play on day 2. But scroll up real quick. I just want to make sure. Is there? Go down a little.
What position are you looking for? Let's just look
running
at
back.
position.
Running back. Yeah. So yeah, DJ Giddens is interesting. I think this is early-ish, but probably where the Bengals would have to take him. But early-ish for where the average fan would want the Bengals to take a running back. But I keep mentioning it because I do think it's in play that early. There's always usually a surprise pick at some point. You think about the Jordan Battle pick at safety on day 2 a couple of years ago. Chris Paul Jr., by the way, I would love it just to have Chris Paul on the Bengals. Yeah. That would be a fun one. The linebacker out of Mississippi. But I don't know how you look at this and you don't say Tate Ratledge. You are a Cincinnati Bengal.
Yeah, Tate Ratledge certainly jumping off the page here. As a guy that's played guard, you'd have to check on the medicals. He had, I think it was tightrope surgery, and he wasn't very good after that. But then he had a great combine, tested like a great athlete. A lot of the running backs that I really liked did get picked before our pick. Just looking at some of the guys that got picked just before this pick, Demetrius Knight made it all the way to 76, by the way. Jalen Noel, a wide receiver from Iowa State, who is an exciting player. Elijah Roberts, a bigger-bodied edge rusher from SMU, also players that I would have considered if they were available. But Dylan Sampson and Travion Henderson and all those running backs picked well before our pick between the second and third round.
Xavier Restrepo made it to 65. Benjamin Morrison made it to 66.
Yeah, which is about where he's ranked in the PFF system. Donovan Jackson, who is a guard we were talking about, only got to 52. And it looks like Seattle traded up to take Donovan Jackson there in this particular simulator. Another player that I love, if we hadn't gone defensive tackle in the first round, is CJ West in the third round. If you could get him there from Indiana, picked at 68 by the Las Vegas Raiders. But yeah, Tate Ratledge really jumping off the screen here. The one thing that I'll mention is there's some safeties that if they didn't need a guard, I would love to pick here. I mentioned Kevin Winston, Andrew Mukuba, another one that I think is worth mentioning here that is on the board and very interesting, and potentially even Lathan Ransom from Ohio State. And some intriguing safeties if there wasn't this one pure guard staring at us that we think is certainly fair game at 81, and I can't pick anybody besides Tate Ratledge here.
Yeah, it's got to be Tate Ratledge. The other thing I think on draft day, Deion Walker is certainly someone you start to have a conversation about like right now because of what he is. Obviously, you have medical question marks. You have motor question. There's questions, but we know it's hard to find those big bodies in the middle, so would not be shocked at all if they were interested there.
And we did learn that Deion Walker was playing with a broken back all year. And so
the medicals are a big factor there for sure.
Well, and it potentially explains why he looks like he's playing so high all the time and why some of his production in his third year wasn't as good as it had been. PFF doesn't love our draft here. You can let us know what you think. Maybe it's the second round pick. Maybe it's the first round pick. They think we should have picked Mike Green. And we did scroll down the PFF board to get to Walter Nolan. And there's certainly compelling arguments for Mike Green, for Derek Harmon, for James Pierce, for a bunch of different players besides Walter Nolan with that first round pick. But I do think that Nolan and Harmon would both be fine picks there. In the second round, we go linebacker, James. We go to Carson Schlesinger from UCLA, and that's a plug-and-play linebacker for you. Linebacker of the future as well as the present, where he can take over Logan Wilson's mantle at the end of that first rookie contract and be an extension candidate for the Cincinnati Bengals if all things go according to plan. And Tate Ratledge is probably a day one starter. And so I think we got 3 day one starters here. It doesn't feel like we necessarily got force multipliers unless that's Walter Nolan, and he turns into that for you on the defensive front. But that's, to me, feeling a little bit of the pressure that I'm feeling trying to get through these drafts with the Bengals needs.
Yeah, well, that's why if you have a 3-tech, you could go Calais Campbell, or a Calais Campbell, then you go Malachi Starks in round 1. If you're not thinking about linebacker necessarily or guard, then it opens things up where or you go Colston Loveland round. I mean, there are really high end players here. And if you limit it to, all right, you got to go defensive line round 1, which we didn't do, but we kind of appealed to what we thought people would want. It's going to be tough. It really is. And so this is just one of many, folks, but interesting draft season. The pressure's on, Jake.
And one of the big issues here is, what about a Trey Hendrickson successor? What about a Trey Hendrickson replacement if that's needed? That's an answer that we don't have yet. We didn't get an edge rusher, period, in the top 3 rounds here. So if you're looking for an edge rusher that's going to make an impact this year, you're either hoping one falls to you in the 2nd round, or they're going to have to use their 1st round pick there. And that's another bit of pressure that they have to deal with that we did not really handle in this particular mock draft as far as addressing the edge rusher position.
Hey, the odds of them going defensive tackle and edge with 2 of their first 3 picks, it's not great. I know everyone wants to do it, and it's like, oh yeah, they're going to go guard, defensive tackle, edge, or edge, defensive tackle, guard. Don't be shocked. Don't be shocked when that's not the case. I'm not sure that's going to be the case. And so prepare yourself. And this prepares everyone.
We'll, of course, have an increasing feel for what we expect the Bengals to do as we get closer and closer. We usually get 1 or 2 picks, right? When we're trying to project what the Bengals are going to do.
Or 3.
Or 3.
4.
Sometimes we're off by a round.
Or 7. We'll nail the trade down too.
Sometimes James tells me I can't put McKinley Jackson in the 3rd round of our mocks, and then we're one less player than
whatever.
We can draft.
You never called the Jermaine Burton. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, nobody did. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Rip our draft to shreds in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. Until next time, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.